Did you know that Shakespeare used blackface in his plays? Titus Andronicus is considered to be Shakespeare's first tragedy, which is apt because
Jesus Christ!
He wrote every bad thing you could think of. Human sacrifice, gang essay, mutilation, ritual butchery, and mother-son cannibalism. One villain of the play, Aaron, is referred to as a Moor, known during Shakespeare's era as an African, Arab, or Muslim person. We find the same description in the tragedy of Othello, Moor of Venice. While Othello's race is ambiguous, most scholars and artists depict him as a black man. This is usually supplemented by textual context. Othello is being manipulated by his jealous underlings who try to convince him that his wife Desdemona is cheating on him. In Act 3, Scene 3, Othello says that Desdemona's unfaithfulness has darkened his name so much that it matches his black face. Iago, who is the one doing the manipulating, tells Desdemona's father that a black ram, Othello, is getting it on with his white ewe, Desdemona. This collective imagery of blackness and interracial villainy has influenced how Othello is performed on stage. So I ask you again, did you know that Shakespeare used blackface in his plays? During Shakespeare's early run, Richard Burbage often played the role of Othello. Burbage, who was a white Renaissance actor, may have even worn blackface to do so. This is speculated to be the case due to this illustration, circa 1595. It was created by Henry Peacham, a writer of the 17th century. He had watched a performance of Titus Andronicus and went home to his parchment, inspired by what he saw. This image would become the only surviving illustration of a Shakespeare production, but it also reflects a common Elizabethan practice: white actors performing in blackface. Ayanna Thompson states that between 1579 and 1642, at least 50 plays were staged with racialized figures, making the Renaissance theaters flush with blackface backstage. A little over a century after Shakespeare's death, colonies in America started playing the fuck out of Othello. According to Thompson, it was one of their favorite productions. And of course, blackface was a common occurrence. It wasn't until the 1830s that the form of blackface we're most familiar with, that is minstrel shows, became popular in America. This form of entertainment was spearheaded by T.D. Rice, who created the character Jim Crow. Legend has it that Mr. Rice saw a black disabled man dancing and decided to make an entire caricature out of it, you know, for shits and giggles. He wore tattered clothes, eaten up shoes, and of course, blackened skin. Minstrel shows were uniquely American and was one of the most popular entertainment forms in the country's history. By the 1840s, it was an established industry. Traveling troupes went around the country, sharing slapstick speeches, performing plantation tunes, and acting generally uncouth. All of this was supplemented with everyday objects that further caricatured and misrepresented blackness. Brand mascots, shoe shine machines, books, postcards, salt and pepper shakers, and so much more. White icons across generations, from Shirley Temple to Judy Garland, performed in blackface. Hell, even black actors donned the infamous burnt cork or shoe polish mask. By the turn of the century, blackface and its entertainment form known as minstrelsy had become stitched into the very fabric of American society. You couldn't have one without the other. Even our contemporary adaptations of Othello, like 1965's version starring Laurence Olivier, used blackface.
Even this has more undertone than that one Euphoria foundation.
But what about now? After centuries of getting it wrong, Western society has decided that we already got it right in November 2008. It's hard to be a nation of racists when you're being led by a black man. Never mind all those events where white conservatives burned dolls that look like Obama and hung dolls with Obama's name on it. and got that one billboard in Wisconsin. We are in a post-racial society, utterly utopian in our togetherness. But, word on the street, there's a new form of racial hijacking parading as entertainment. Within the depths of online forums, plastered on conservative headlines, frothed about within friend groups, and considered entirely blasphemous among Facebook Christians. People everywhere are declaring that they have found something even worse than blackface. Don't laugh. Black actors playing white roles.
Let's just laugh at him now.
Today's performance asks of you, what is the difference between whitewashing and so-called blackwashing? How does our panic about diversity in movies relate to an age-old white supremacist lie? And why are so many white women crying in their cars about a made-up film? Quvenzhané Wallis was 9 years old when she was cast as the titular Annie in 2014's adaptation. The character Annie is derived from the 1924 comic strip Little Orphan Annie, which followed Annie's cyclical and sometimes humorous relationship with her adopted family. But in 1977, Annie hit the stage of Broadway on the wings of a book written by Thomas Meehan. Now, Meehan created something entirely his own, using only a few characters from the original comic. That is, Annie, Daddy Warbucks, and Sandy. Every rendition of Annie, from drawing to book to Broadway, was always portrayed the same way. A one-time blonde due to design purposes, primarily redheaded, and always white. Interstage left, misery. Quvenzhané Wallis was the first Black girl to ever take on the role of Annie, and people were dependably terrible about it.
They probably should have called this movie Shaquanda. Smiley face. Why not do a movie of a white Martin Luther King Jr.? I want to live in a colorless world, but I will not stand for a Black Annie.
Quvenzhané was being met with this behavior on all fronts. The Onion published an article, obviously satirical but still wild to read, calling her a cunt. Chrissy Teigen that same year went on the strangest rant known to man, calling Quvenzhané a cocky brat that Chrissy is only being forced to like because Quvenzhané is like 9? Oh my god. And I know what you're thinking. This occurred in 2013 and 2014. 2 notorious years where we made a little oopsie daisies with race. We got it wrong. And we apologize. But I could have begun this section with any recent casting choice where a person of color is chosen for what is considered a traditionally white role, and the premise would be the exact same. In 2016, Zendaya was announced to play MJ Watson in the upcoming film Spider-Man: Homecoming. While MJ's name pays homage to Peter Parker's main love interest, that being Mary Jane, I don't know why I just forgot that being Mary Jane, the character is not a reprisal. Instead, she's a reinvention, an entirely new character by the name of Michelle Jones. This detail went over the heads of some Marvel fans.
I love diversity and all, but Hollywood is looking ridiculous right now. A Black Mary Jane? Nope. Won't buy any Marvel products. They compromise the story and the characters in the name of political correctness. She was handpicked to appease the PC culture that is literally ripping our nation apart.
In 2017, Senegalese American actor Anna Diop was cast to play Starfire in the 2018 adaptation of Teen Titans. Starfire, as you may know, is an alien with orange skin. She can fly, she has superhuman strength, and is again an alien with orange skin. Imagine my surprise when people were mad that she wasn't white.
Starfire? or LaQuisha. LMAO, of course. Of course she'd be black. I'm not even being racist, but...
In February of 2022, 12-year-old Leah Jeffries was cast to play Annabeth Chase in the television adaptation of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. The racial abuse got so bad that her TikTok was banned, and the creator of the books had to issue multiple statements coming to her defense. Again, she was 12 years old.
Let white people play white roles.
In 2023, The Little Mermaid premiered, with Halle Bailey taking the lead role of Ariel. Jesus, fuck. In 2024, a fan cast of Avantika playing Rapunzel. A few weeks ago, yesterday,
this casting is racist towards
Romeo
white people.
and
Tyrone. It's someone's childhood being ruined. Be your own Indian princess. None of the white girls who like Rapunzel will be able to identify. It's not set in Verona, but in Harlem, right? LMAO, of course. Of course, a black married Jane. I will not stand for a black Annie.
Stop. If you're a viewer of mine or of other video essays, learning should be right up your alley. Not just any learning, but fun, interactive learning. That's where Babbel, the sponsor of today's video, comes in. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world. The secret to their success? Fun, intuitive lessons. They help you learn languages through real-life conversations, which is perfect for people like me, because I learn best through immersion. I've told you this before, but my partner is Mexican and their family speaks Spanish. Over the years, I've kind of been sitting there listening to them, like, have conversations, like gaining shiny new words and phrases from them like a crow. And through this immersive way of learning, I have definitely picked up a few things, but not everything. Babbel helps me fill in those blanks. Mis padres son profesores. My parents are teachers. One thing that Babbel has helped tremendously with is the feminine masculine grammar system present in Spanish. Most things are assigned a gender, which is hard for me to grasp as a vague entity. I always tend to get things like buenos dias wrong because something about that just doesn't seem right to me. But it helps that Babbel has so many ways to get familiar with the language, from speaking it, to looking at flashcards, to writing it out. There is a science to Babbel, okay? It is scientifically proven by researchers at such places like Yale to help you start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. The lessons are created by over 650 real language experts, making it possible to learn real, practical conversation. Whether you're traveling for the summer, learning a language for work, or simply forming new relationships, Babbel might be the right fit for you. It meets you where you're at, whether you're a beginner or intermediate, and with just 10 minutes a day, you can form a closer relationship with the language of your choice.
Él es el profe de literatura.
Oh, literatura. Literatura. I can't roll my R's. The cool part is Babbel offers a 20-day money-back guarantee if you simply don't vibe with it. You can click the link in my description or scan the QR code to get 60% off your subscription. And make sure to tell me what language you would like to learn and why in the comment section below. Thanks to Babbel for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's get back to the chaos. Video after video, comment after comment, year after year of violent, deep-rooted ignorance. The boogeyman in charge of causing all this ruckus is the concept of blackwashing. That is, casting a black person in a role that has previously been thought of as white. Blackwashing is used imprecisely. And wrongly. Can't forget about wrongly. Avantika, for instance, is not black. And yet the term blackwashing was continuously used to describe a fan cast of her playing Rapunzel. The term is also used maliciously. Think of the phrases "all lives matter" and "reverse racism." These phrases are popular rebuttals to conversations about anti-blackness. Blackwashing operates the same way. It's used as a rebuttal to conversations about whitewashing. In simple terms, whitewashing refers to the practice of casting white actors to play non-white roles. Minstrel shows and blackface were very popular forms of whitewashing. Today, these actions are considered outdated and frowned upon, But it doesn't mean that whitewashing as a whole is obsolete. In fact, it has found new ways to kind of push the same message. Alyssa M. Smith considers whitewashing a actively racist practice that seeks to purposefully disappear people of color. Today, this practice is usually employed through TV and film. Take 2019's Harriet, for example. Writer and producer Kazi Lemons alleged that a studio executive wanted Julia Roberts to play the lead role of the iconic Harriet Tubman. The Fifth Wave is another example. It was released in 2016 as an adaptation of Rick Yancey's eponymous book. He had written a character named Marika Ringer Kimura, who was of Japanese and Apache descent. In the movie, she was played by Micah Monroe, who for all intents and purposes is a brilliant actress. But she's not Japanese, nor is she Apache. Rick Yancey, the author of the novel, stated that during the casting process of the movie, he told producers 3 times that Ringer was Asian. They did not listen to him. It did not matter. This was also the case of 2017's Death Note, where Japanese characters were definitely not played by... Ariana, what are you doing here? 2010's Last Airbender is probably the most well-known offense, seeing as how the casting was so bad that it pioneered an entire website and new terminology to describe just how bad it was. I mean, I would be mad too if Jasper Cullen was cast to play an indigenous brown-skinned character.
Battle scars.
Stephanie Meyer doesn't even like people of color like that. Allegedly. Whitewashing stretches back all the way to the inception of film. Back in the day, it was common practice for a white actor to don blackface or yellowface to play Black and Asian characters. Because what were they going to do? Hire a person of color? If they did that, then we would never have cringed at Mickey Rooney's egregious portrayal of a Japanese person, in turn spurring the worst apology in the history of mankind. Those that didn't like it, I forgive them. And God bless America. God bless the universe. God bless Japanese, Chinese, Indians, all of them. Now come on, you know Shane Dawson. Even Shane Dawson did better than that. Today, whitewashing is justified by studios who argue that diverse casts just don't sell. Hollywood is a business after all, states Smith. Unless you're Will Smith or Morgan Freeman, you will not be able to sell our big production. The act of whitewashing then implies that without white individuals, the story would be meaningless. White media is considered more palatable, more marketable, a better use of money than diverse media. For instance, the 2014 biblical film, Exodus, Gods and Kings, would probably have made more sense if Egyptian actors were cast as the Egyptian characters. But why do that when you could have Christian Bale as Moses? Ridley Scott, the director, emphatically explained that without having such big names as Christian Bale and the iconic Tom Buchanan, the movie simply would have perished. I can't mount a film of this budget and say that my lead actor is Muhammad so-and-so from such and such. I'm just not going to get financed. That's really funny, considering that the movie failed commercially. Exodus actually exemplifies what Alyssa M. Smith argues in their independent study, that white-led media does not inherently outsell diverse media. It's an excuse, a figment of Hollywood's imagination, which is used to further marginalize BIPOC stories. You might be thinking, how is any of this different from blackwashing? Amazing question, bestie. Blackwashing does not operate on the same level of power and discrimination that whitewashing does. It's also simply not done for the same reasons that whitewashing is. As Smith argues, blackwashing lacks a history of racial abuse and social power. Whitewashing is a byproduct of our Eurocentric obsession, and it continues to fuel white supremacy. It tells people of color that their stories, their lives, people, and culture would be made better white. Blackwashing, on the other hand, is a strategy used by Hollywood to diversify casting and give people of color more representation. We'll get into like the logistics and ramifications of that later. But for now, let's focus on representation as a whole.
The National Research Group conducted a study in September of 2020 that revealed a majority of Black people feel unrepresented in the media. Further, 1,400 people between the ages of 18 and 54 were interviewed to determine how they feel about representation. The study found that 67% of people in the United States, regardless of political ideology or ethnicity, felt that there is a greater need of on-screen representation of Black people of all ages, genders, sexualities, and disabilities. Moreover, 74% of the people in the study indicated that diversity influences what they watch. The more diversity in a given media, the more likely they'll tune in.
But as we discussed, diverse media rarely gets funding. This leads to a clear disparity in the industry.
According to Statista, between 2011 and 2022, white actors in the United States maintained a monopoly on lead roles. In 2011, 89% of lead actors in the US were white. The distribution in this category increased and decreased over time, bit by bit, finding a record high for people of color leads in 2020 before ultimately declining once more. As of 2022, lead roles for people of color were at 21.6%. The same pattern can be found for film directors, 17% of which being people of color, and film writers, who boast just 12%. Even television is greatly unequal in representation.
This is one of the clear differences between whitewashing and blackwashing. When a character is blackwashed, audiences still have that original source material, but they also have innumerable other characters, actors, and media to find themselves represented in. That's by design. White people are seen as the normal or default race, making it nearly impossible not to find themselves represented. When a character is whitewashed, on the other hand, the original source still exists, surely, but it exists in a very limited index. That is one less Black character, one less Asian character, one less Hispanic character, and one more white character out of millions. So what remains the problem? It's toe time, baby! Toe is a newsletter, not a foot fetish, and I have been running it for a little over 2 years now. I send out prompts and allow my audience to write in with their own opinions on a given subject, with the chance to have those opinions read aloud by me. The emails are always so meticulous and so funny, and I adore reading every single one. If you're ever interested in joining the community, you can find it on my website or linked in the description box below. Let's see who wrote in. Let's start with this one. Jasper, who uses they them pronouns, wrote in saying, I think the white frenzy that pops up every time movies, especially Disney movies, choose a BIPOC lead has a lot to do with a misplaced sense of ownership of the source material. White people cling to anything that makes us feel like a part of something real, often to the detriment of whoever's culture we consider interesting. So white women who love The Little Mermaid as much as I did consider that a part of their personal history, and because of their latent biases, see that history as being quote-unquote taken over when non-white people are in those roles, or when new roles aren't centering the experiences of people they feel they can project directly onto. Another subscriber agrees, saying, mainstream American whiteness is very unnatural, and I feel like there's a hole in the center of it that craves connection to something more substantial than itself. So, Anonymous states, people often hide their anger and discomfort with diverse casting behind the argument that minorities deserve good original stories instead of settling for adaptations. But the truth is, we need both. We need the kids to look back at those iconic world-established characters and find versions that look like them, as much as we need the new tales / the original stories. Because it gets tired trying to be told that you're going to be Alex when you play Totally Spies just because you're Black. Or you're going to be Hey Lin when you play Witch because you're Asian. Rowan uses they them pronouns and wrote, I feel like for a lot of people in positions of privilege, they grow up never having to consider another viewpoint within that identity. Queer people grow up finding themselves in straight characters, POC grow up finding themselves in white characters, disabled and deaf people grow up finding themselves in non-disabled and hearing characters, because a lot of the time, there wasn't another option. White people don't have to adapt like that to see ourselves represented, at least racially.
and the comfortable position of occupying an identity viewed as default by our society can feel threatened when that notion is challenged. Whitewashing is underpinned by centuries of erasure of non-white voices. It upholds societal power dynamics that are actively harmful, and thus the idea cannot be applied in reverse. Whitney wrote, "The typical response to POC, specifically women, being cast in these popular roles is that there should be original stories written for these actresses. The quiet part following that statement is that these roles should not exist so we don't have to bear the burden of looking at too many non-white women on screen. The reality is, the stories written with women of color in mind are often suppressed by studios, be it with lack of advertising, weak budgeting, or even lack of an existing IP to bring in reliable fans. So an entire collection of media is completely buried, and when women of color are limited to those roles, they're erased too, which I cynically believe is the point." Last but not least, God damn, girl, you had a love spell on that or something, because I did not want to. Finally, Lindsay states, "This is in regards to the Disney remake Pearl Clutchers, specifically white women. I feel like when these women are lamenting over blackwashing, what they're trying to protect is an accuracy and faithfulness to the original film, but their ability to self-identify with the white female protagonists, like Ariel or Rapunzel. Or more accurately, the ability to insert themselves into that role. Non-white girls and women have had to empathize with and attempt to identify with white protagonists because of a lack of diversity. White women never had to empathize/identify with POC characters while watching their precious Disney princess films, or even look at black bodies at all for very long. I'm looking at you, Princess and the Frog." So when they're faced with a black Ariel or Indian Rapunzel, they just combust, I guess. I guess so too. We have to talk about ignorance. Deliberate ignorance. Ignorance that has the strength to carry big lies and even bigger hatred. Because at the very root of our issue, ignorance flourishes. Let's start with something super funny. You may remember that at the end of March, Francesca Amura Rivers was cast to play Juliet in West End's production of Romeo and Juliet. She is, of course, starring alongside Tom Holland, America's sweetheart. People were weird about it. We won't rehash it, but there was a very specific flavor of ignorance that peppered this dish, and I just found that absolutely balls to the wall insane. One user tweeted, "Romeo and Juliet movie then versus now. They are rewriting history in front of our very eyes." You mean the movie where Mercutio is a black goddess in drag and John Leguizamo is a beautiful gun-wielding gangster in a time-inappropriate goatee? Because I love that movie too. God, don't you miss when they made accurate movies with accurate castings and you could go to a speakeasy in the 20s while Jay-Z is playing on speakers while your criminal neighbor drones on and on about how he wants to fuck your cousin? What happened to accuracy in the film industry? Oh, it's not even a real movie? Oh, it's just a play that no one raging about on the internet was ever going to see in the first place? I mean, you think people would do that? They would get on the internet? When it comes to blackwashing, people on the internet love to spew nonsense about accuracy. Juliet should be an Italian woman. Okay, well, if we want to be puritanical about Shakespeare, which no one in the industry who has sense wants to be, we would cast Juliet as a little boy because that's how women's roles were filled during his time. And Romeo should also be Italian. Tom Holland is British, but no one's mentioning that. Or with the Rapunzel debacle, when a fan casted Avantika for funsies and everyone killed over because of it, Rapunzel should be German. It's a German fairy tale. She should only be played by authentic German actresses like Sabrina Carpenter. Did you know that Rapunzel is not exclusively German? Surely the Grimm's brothers did create the story of Rapunzel in their collection of folktales, seeking to preserve German culture. But when they sought out to build this collection, they interviewed droves of people, from common folk to aristocrats. And they found that a lot of these stories that they thought were distinctly German actually had non-Germanic predecessors. The base story of Rapunzel was one of them.
The idea of a long-haired maiden trapped in a tower or having magical healing powers existed in Italy, Persia, and France long before it existed in Germany. That's kind of how folk tales work. The point about having oral traditions is to pass them down, but they become mutable, transformed by time, culture, family, and purpose. The very point of a folk tale is for it to change and reach new cultures. Even the fairy tales present in the Grimm brothers' books, the ones we wish to be purified and exclusive to one group, were sourced from many places. Norse mythology, Roman and Greek mythology, and even the Bible. When it comes to the Little Mermaid, netizens argue that she can't be black because the story is set off of the coast of Denmark. Are there not black Danish people? We actually don't know where the Little Mermaid is set. The source material mentions Atlantica, a fake underwater kingdom, because it's about mermaids. There's a talking Jamaican crab, but people argue that it's actually off the coast of Norway. The movies are even more unclear than the source material because Disney has a habit of meshing together a bunch of time periods and settings. Eric's sailors are dressed distinctly French, according to the internet. There's a Caribbean crab, of course, and Mediterranean characteristics. Eric's castle has palm trees blooming outside. And besides, the movie takes great liberties with Hans Christian Andersen's original story, considering Ariel is supposed to die and turn into sea foam at the end. And they give her red hair, seeing as hair color was not mentioned in the story. Oh, they also give her the name Ariel because Andersen also never named her. The point of all of this isn't to argue that these characters were never white. That's simply not debatable. That is a white person. The point is to show how imprecise ignorance can be. People cry about being source accurate, but then don't even know the history of the source that they want to be portrayed as accurate. People criticize diverse casting in a play, failing to realize that diverse casting has been a common practice in the world of theater for decades. Do you know how many Black Juliets there have been? How many Black Romeos? How many afro-haired, makeup-wearing Mercutios in sparkly skirts? The right amount, I'll tell you that, because people have been rewriting and reworking Shakespeare since his death. When London theaters returned from exile in 1660, playwrights chose to rewrite Shakespeare to update the language, which they and audiences alike found terribly outdated. They stopped casting little boys and started allowing women on stage due to the new popularity of actresses. They even changed the storylines to make them less confusing during times of stark political tension because they didn't want to upset or confuse their viewers. Art needs to and does adapt to time, at least in some ways. That in part makes it iconic. That is what made Shakespeare, the one you want to purify so much, that is what made him stand the test of time, because people changed his work. They brought it with them into new decades, into new centuries, into new mediums. We have a gnome adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, for God's sake. Getting incensed to the point of racial abuse, even though you couldn't bother researching whether the new R&J is a play or a movie, makes you deliberately ignorant. And that's all the more dangerous. Dangerous because it puts these random women of color at the altar of your vengeance for no good damn reason. But it's also dangerous because it reveals something about the purpose of your anger. It reveals to me your secret. I know why you're really angry.
Diversity equals genocide. This is a phrase popularized by disciples of Bob Whitaker, an ex-Republican aide and Reagan administration appointee.
Because girl, you can always trace shit back to Reagan. Alongside this phrase, Whitaker's followers also created variants like diversity means chasing down the last white person and anti-racist means anti-white. Don't tell on yourself like that. It was the backing vocal of every white supremacist on the internet, and the motto used by the Tree of Life synagogue shooter. Not everyone who is upset about diverse casting is a white supremacist. But a lot of their gripes are similar to that original slogan. It's racist against white people to cast an Indian actress in a universal folktale. White girls deserve a true-to-color Little Mermaid whose name and hair was changed for Disney's adaptation. Oh god, my personal favorite. Juliet is white, Italian, European. She should be played by a white woman. This anti-white diversity bullshit is ridiculous and insulting. These casting choices expose a panic that has been brewing within some white people for decades, centuries even. A panic that has only worsened with the very small progress people of color have made over the last 10 years alone. The panic that the presence of one of us means the disappearance of one of you. It makes you so angry, so lonely, that you feel the need to flood an innocent person's Instagram with violent racism. It makes you show your hand by declaring that every character of color, of which you can only name a few, should be replaced by white people. Martin Luther King Jr., who is not a character by the way, should be played by Christian Bale. Tiana should be played by Dove Cameron. You fear that you're being replaced, and that fear is one that goes back deep in the white supremacist archives.
We begin tonight with that breaking news, a horrific scene in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Do you remember 2017's Unite the Right rally, where white supremacists marched through the streets chanting, "You will not replace us! You will not replace us! Blood and sword! Blood and sword! Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets!" Their presence had a dual purpose that night: to oppose the removal of a Confederate statue nearby, and to unify the scattered, primarily online existence of white supremacists. Their mantra, "You will not replace us," is reflective of that last goal.
You see, it stems from the Great Replacement theory, a popular notion within white supremacist circles. It's been used by lone wolf extremists who were radicalized on the internet, political news anchors who regurgitated to their vulnerable bases, and even sitting US congresspeople, such as Matt Gaetz, who argued in 2020 that Democrats are attempting cultural genocide by replacing America. 3 people are connected to the inception and popularization of this theory. To believe in the Great Replacement is to believe that the very essence of white culture is being threatened by the inclusion of people of color. The anger people direct at diverse casting seems small in comparison, but it's the same sentiment said differently. I've noticed a continuous reference to diverse media rewriting white history or being anti-white. Netizens argue that non-white society has been given previously white characters, effectively tarnishing or replacing them. One person even stated that race swapping is inherently racist and offensive to white people. Removing color X to be replaced by color Y is racist. Woke people don't care because woke people don't care because the target group is white. White people aren't people. You can do whatever you want to us, and it won't matter. That's the message they want to give our children. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The same pandering message of protecting the children and culture. Same assumption that diversity means targeting white people. The fear in all of these comments is the fear of replacement, of being utterly obsolete in the eyes of diversity. My question is, why do we spend so much energy saying one thing, but meaning another? You emphatically declare that you're not racist, you just care about accuracy. You're not racist, you just care about the preservation of white culture. You're not racist, you just don't think people of color should be allowed in your line of sight. You're not racist, but you'll admit to being so when it comes to a random Disney fan cast. Doesn't all of that posturing tire you out? Isn't that an exhausting maintenance routine? Because girl, you're training me. In fact, you're training me and my homegirls. So how do we solve this issue? If I say a complete and total overhaul of every industry system and belief in the United States, would that make you nervous? Okay, I thought so. Those who oppose casting people of color in previously white-led roles think that creating more diverse media is the only way to fix this. And technically, they're right. Broken clocks and all of that. One way to show people of color that our stories matter is actually funding our stories, to create new characters that reflect our culture, our histories, and our lifestyles. But I don't think people who bring this point up actually care about diversifying the industry, because they only bring it up in relation to blackwashing. Since you got your degree and know everything, how will new characters be made if, as we've already discussed, there is no funding for BIPOC stories? There are no directors, there are no writers, there are no studio executives. Even when a person of color breaks through the industry, they still have to fight tooth and nail to keep aspects of their culture within the story. Everything Everywhere All at Once, for example, was a major success, pop culture wise, but also financially. And yet they had to struggle to keep their casting focused on Asian Americans. Studio executives wanted a white-led cast for a story about Asian American families. Blade was also brought up a lot amongst netizens who argued, what if they cast Blade as white? The blacks would be enraged. Yeah, they already tried to do that. A studio head wanted Blade to be white. And when they couldn't get that done, they cast a white actor to be his mentor, even though Blade's mentor in the comics was also black. So, what now? It's not as simple as just making our own stories. We do. It's the industry that we try to push those stories through that's the issue. Will blackwashing save us from any of this? Girl, obviously not. Christian J. Warner references what they call plastic representation, wherein representation is artificial while being shaped to look like meaningful imagery. Warner applies this theory to the act of blackwashing, arguing that it's used as a strategy to suggest progress without tackling the structural issues that limit said progress. For instance, the act of so-called blackwashing picked up massively around 2017. Black actors were cast in big roles, even if those roles were previously white. From Marvel and DC characters to Shakespearean subjects, even fucking Anne Boleyn, a real historical person. And yet the diversity disparity in the film and television industry barely flinched. Representation is extremely important. People of color deserve to see themselves represented in the media with as much normalcy, tediousness, and frequency as white people. But at the same time, we can't treat representation as our apex. Angela Davis once said that diversity is not justice.
It's a corporate strategy, a strategy designed to ensure that the institution functions in the same way that it functioned before, except that now you have some black faces and brown faces. It's a difference that makes no difference at all.
While the black and brown actors who dare flirt with traditionally white roles are amazing and talented and deeply needed, their entrance into the eyesight of wider audiences reveals something to us that has nothing to do with progress. It reveals the general fear of diversity, the ignorance that drives it, and the dire need for transformation on all fronts. I say we ban Disney until we figure out what the hell's going on.